What's up everyone, I'm CallumOnToast, and in today's video, as I mentioned in the last one, I'm going to be discussing some of the most controversial topics within the Go Battle League and Pokemon Go as a whole, and these topics are going to be based off what you guys suggested, as well as some that I've come up with myself, since most people just wanted to hear about the algorithm, so there actually wasn't many other suggestions, but we're going to be diving straight into the deep end with this one, starting with the algorithm. But before we get into that, let's just start with the question of the day. Before I say my piece on the algorithm, I want to know your thoughts. Do you believe in it? Do you even care if there's an algorithm or not? Do you find it frustrating that it's a topic that most people won't stop talking about? Let me know in the comment section down below. But with that being said, let's just get into the video. So for anyone that's been living under a rock for the past few years and doesn't know what I mean when I say algorithm, it's a broad term used to describe the matchmaking algorithm in GBL, which many people believe doesn't just take into account your elo when pairing you with another trainer, but will also take into account the team you're using, the movesets you're running on each Pokemon, and other things like recent performance. I.e., if you're doing really well, that's when the algorithm kicks in and decides, no, we can't be having this, here's a bunch of hard counters, and it's essentially there to keep everyone as close as possible to a 50% win rate. So what is this harsh truth that most people just won't accept? It's that it doesn't really matter what you believe. We're all playing the same game. Your opinion on whether or not there's an algorithm doesn't actually impact how you play the game, but it does impact on how you feel about the game and how you interact with other players. Let's say, for example, you're someone that is absolutely certain there's an algorithm designed to keep you at that 50% win rate, so every time you get a bad matchup, it's not your fault you lost, it's just the algorithm that's preventing you from winning. And I don't think that's a very healthy mindset, because it won't really allow you to improve. You're not taking any accountability for your losses, you're just blaming it on external factors, and whilst yes, there are plenty of matches that based on team composition are impossible to win, but there are plenty of battles that you can fight back from, but you're just not focusing on the ways you could have played differently when you lose, and instead putting 100% of the blame on something entirely out of your control, and because of that, you're just not going to learn. If there really is an algorithm, the people that don't believe it exists are still being affected by it. It's not like the algorithm only targets people that are aware of its existence. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just that the people that don't believe in it are just more focused on what they're doing. They'll also have games where they are completely hard countered and they can't do anything about the outcome, but they're probably just less likely to be reactionary and completely change their team every time they lose because they run into a bad lead. They'll see it as being unlucky, but they'll also be aware that they can also experience luck in their favor too, so they'll kind of just get on with it. Also, talk about the algorithm just seems to bring out the worst in people. If you think it's obvious that there has to be an algorithm, it doesn't mean that others are stupid for not believing it. Chances are they just don't care about it all that much. I personally don't have strong opinions about the algorithm itself, but I just can't stand it when people bash others for not having the same opinion as them, especially when their opinion isn't based on particularly strong arguments. So as an example, a lot of people think that an argument for the algorithm existing is that nearly everyone has roughly a 50% win rate in the Go Battle League. It doesn't matter if you're an ace rank player or someone that hits legend every single season, you're always going to be around that 50% mark. For those of you that do believe in the algorithm, let's just imagine a hypothetical scenario where it's only your elo that's taken into account when matchmaking. Of course, for a lot of people, this is just how they think it works, so you know, just ignore that if that's the case. But anyways, let's say you're a really good player, someone at the start of the season, within your first 100 battles, you're going to get like 75% or even an 85% win rate. And this is because you're facing opponents of all different skill levels, but because everyone in those first few ranks is going to be completely varied and you're a really good player, you're just going to get a lot of wins in those first few battles. But as you go further into the season, you're going to keep on climbing, but the opponents you're facing are also now really strong because they're also winning a lot. They're in the same elo bracket as you, and eventually you'll get to the point where you plateau and everyone in your elo range is pretty much as good as you are. So obviously when you're facing people at the same skill level, you're no longer going to be going 4-1 and 5-0 in every set. You're probably going to have a few negative sets, fluctuate in elo a bit, but hover around roughly the same sort of range. You might continue to climb, but it's going to be a much slower process. And obviously if you spend the majority of the season battling against people just as good as you, it's going to bring your win rate back down towards 50%. Now it's never going to go below 50% or even that close to 50%, but essentially the more you battle, the closer it will go towards 50%. But that's literally the entire point of the elo system. As you win more, you face better opponents, but likewise, if at the start of the season you're not very good and you only win about 20 of those first 100 battles, you're eventually going to face worse opponents until you get to a range where the players are equally as skilled as you are, and you'll start to edge closer to that 50% win rate as you start to pick up more wins. But this whole 50% win rate argument can be completely debunked by a specific set of trainers that try to hit Legend in as few battles as possible each season. So for them, the tactic is actually to start very late in the season, because typically most of the best battlers are already going to be at Legend or well above that 3000 elo range, so they can just climb through those early ranks with ease, mostly just beating newer battlers that started the season late. By the time they reach rank 20, they've probably still maintained a super high win rate and actually can start an elo range around like 26 or 2700 because of that. And remember, these trainers hit Legend every single season. They're probably good enough to be in the sort of leaderboard range, so they're still well above the trainers in that 2700 to 3000 elo range, so they're actually able to hit Legend in around 300 battles and get to a close to 80% win rate when they get there. And obviously if they were to battle more, eventually they would plateau like everyone else, but because their only goal is hitting Legend in as few battles as possible, they get there with roughly an 80% win rate. So that just completely debunks that the algorithm forces people to get around a 50% win rate. Now the next thing we'll talk about is getting hard countered, often even when you switch up your team. So just an example, let's say we built this new team and we based off the Pokemon that we were seeing yesterday, it actually looks pretty strong, but in our first few battles we get completely hard countered each time. I'm going to give an example as a team that I used in the Remix Cup recently with Salazzle, Double Dragons, and let's just say in this example 4 out of our first 5 leads are Quagsire, with the other one being a Mantine, and then obviously that's pretty bad for our Salazzle, so we swap out into a Dragon type, but most of those teams also have an Ice type or a Fairy in the back. What a lot of people might do is think, well, that's pretty rough. You know, if Quagsire is now going to be the most common lead, maybe it's safer to run the Dragon up front and then maybe run a double fire team in the back instead. So still having that Salazzle plus a Dragon in the core, but maybe just switching up the lead. And then eventually in that next set, unfortunately, we come up against 3 Alola Ninetales, a Steelix and a Magnezone, and we're like, where the hell were these leads when I was running Salazzle up front? I'm sure we've all experienced it at some point, and it feels like you just couldn't make this stuff up. It has to be scripted. There's no way you can switch your team up, have Salazzle in the lead, and then as soon as you remove it, you see a bunch of things that Salazzle absolutely destroys. But I think this is where people that don't believe in the algorithm are able to look at it from the perspective of, well, not every single person is going to be running Quagsire in the lead. I've just been very unfortunate for this set, but if I keep this team in the order it's in, eventually I will start to see some of the Pokemon that my team was set up to beat. And using this exact same example with my Salazzle Double Dragon team, I had a few sets where I had 5 out of 5 bad leads and I only got maybe 1 or 2 wins at most, but I also distinctly remembering 3 sets in a row where I got 14 wins and a tie, and I hard won almost every single lead, and I core broke many teams with my Salazzle. But that wouldn't have happened if after one of the bad sets I decided, nah, there's too many Quagsire in the lead, I have to change my team. Now for all I know, that could have been the algorithm throwing bad leads my way and then eventually giving me much better leads to even things out, but it's not what I was focusing on when I was battling, so I didn't switch up my team, and as a result it worked out for me. Now I do want to point out that in some scenarios, if you keep on losing to a specific team, it might be that a certain content creator or several content creators have put out a video featuring that team and now it's become super common, and if your team hard loses to that team, then that probably does justify switching up your team because you're very likely to keep on seeing it. So I'm not suggesting that if you run into bad team comps you should just never swap your team, but just be logical about it. If you're switching your team up every few games, then you're never going to get any consistency, and that's when you're just going to start facing a bunch of different teams and it's just not going to work for you. One last thing I want to mention before we move on to a different topic is that as you go up or down in elo, you'll experience slight shifts in the meta. Now some people like to call these micro metas, and as an example, in the 2200 elo range you're going to see a drastically different meta to the 2700s, and then again that's going to look very different to the 3300s. The reason for that is because in the 2200 elo range, first of all, you've got loads of battlers at this elo range. You're going to see a ton of variety. A lot of teams might not necessarily make an awful lot of sense. Some teams might be copying a content creator's team, but they actually just don't have the resources to build all 3 Pokemon, so 2 of them will be copied, and then that 3rd Pokemon might be something completely random. You also get a lot of people that might lose a game or 2 and then just completely change their team up. A lot of teams won't really make an awful lot of sense, and then in the 2700 elo range, these are the players that are probably good enough to hit Legend, but they're still pushing, and these teams are going to have a lot more structure to them. They're going to cover for every base. They're going to try and make sure that they have no holes, no weaknesses at all, and as a result, it's actually quite easy to predict. Maybe once you see their first Pokemon, when they save swap, you might be able to predict that 3rd Pokemon because it's just clear based on what they should be pairing them with. So it's actually kind of a lot easier to read teams at this elo range, but of course they are a lot safer. But then as you go into like the 3300s, and obviously this is going to depend on what stage of the season we're at, but say that is a leaderboard place right now, then at this range, some of the teams again start to not really make an awful lot of sense, but I guess the players at this elo range realize they're not going to be seeing every single Pokemon, so they can build teams that are triple weak to something that you might see a ton of in the 2200 elo range, but you just don't see at this legend range. So you can just run a team that's like triple weak to Talonflame, not see any Talonflame, and do incredibly well because of it. But if you were to try to use that team in the 2200 elo range, you might see fire all over the place and it would get absolutely destroyed. So as an example, let's say you have a really good run where you go 5-0 in the first set and then 4-1 in that next set, and suddenly you've gained about 120 elo in just 2 sets, but you've moved into a completely different micro meta where now you're seeing different teams that you hadn't seen at all over the past few days because you sort of stayed around that same sort of elo in that time. But unfortunately in this new meta, your team isn't really as good against some of the teams that you're now facing, and as a result you instantly fall back down within 2 or 3 sets to the elo that you started with. So if you're wondering why whenever I go on a good run do I suddenly face a Pokemon that I hadn't seen in ages that actually does very well into my team, well, that could very well be the reason. But anyways, that's going to be enough talk about the algorithm for now. The main point to take home should be that it might exist, it might not, but if you just focus on your own gameplay, your team building, your team reading, and reflecting on what you could have done differently after a loss, it really does not matter if it exists or not. So the next controversial topic we're going to talk about is Legends tanking. And again, for anyone that doesn't know what this means, it's when players that have already reached Legend for the season lose a ton of games, often deliberately, and end up in an elo bracket well below what they're actually capable of. Now, a lot of people aren't a fan of this because it feels very unfair when they're battling in the 2100s, for example, and they just randomly face up against a legend ranked trainer that is well clear of them in terms of skill level and is more than likely going to beat them in a battle. Now, there are loads of different reasons why someone will tank, and the one that most people will probably be aware of is for the rewards. So after you hit Legend and you claim your new pose, catch that Pikachu Libre that could potentially be a shiny, you unfortunately don't get any better rewards for winning games at 3000 elo compared to 2000 elo. And since when I asked you guys in a recent question of the day what the main reason was that you played GBL, most of you answered that it was for the rewards, a lot of them for the Stardust. So it's probably unsurprising when people reach the highest rank in the game, they're then going to go and try to optimize the amount of rewards or Stardust that they can get when playing, and obviously to go 5-0 in a set at 3000 elo is very difficult, so they'll often tank to a much lower elo where it's almost guaranteed that they can go 5-0 and therefore maximize the Stardust gains that they get each set. And for anyone wondering what the lowest elo you can possibly get down to, it's 300 elo. Don't really know why, seems like a bit of a random number, but I genuinely think to be at this low of an elo range, you'd have to deliberately tank to get there. I don't think it is possible to be that bad at the game that you get all the way down to 300 elo. But also what you forget is that in order for Legends to tank this far, they're also handing out free wins to loads of people on their way down, which no one really seems to mention. So yeah, you might get beat by a Legend player in the 2100s, but that same trainer also gave out like 100 free wins before battling you, so it definitely does even out. Now typically people will tank before, say, a Go Battle Day, and that way when they've got 4 times Stardust, they can pop on a few star pieces and rake in the gains. And yes, this is obviously a selfish reason for people to tank, but I don't think you should blame the players for a flaw in the game design and reward structure for the Go Battle League. Unfortunately, there's just no in-game incentive for players to continue to climb elo after hitting Legend, and something that a lot of people don't realise is that queue times can get horrendous as you climb to a very high elo range. Obviously, the higher you climb, the less opponents you'll have in that same elo bracket, so it'll often take a lot longer to find matches. Last season, I managed to get into the 3300s on a Go Battle Day in the Evolution Cup, but I think I only did about 8 sets across the entire day because it took so long for me to search for battles that eventually I just couldn't be bothered. I only managed 40 out of 100 possible battles, and that's a major reason why people tank. At that time, that was within the sort of top 100 to 200 people in the world for that elo range, but just imagine how bad it gets for people that are trying to push for rank 1 on the leaderboard. They could literally take over an hour trying to search for just one game. Another reason people tank is just because after hitting Legend, a weight has been lifted off their shoulders. They've grinded out those 3-2s, those 4-1s throughout the entire season with their strong meta teams, and now they just want to have a little bit of fun, run some spice picks, but obviously they're not going to be able to perform nearly as well with those teams, and as a result they actually inadvertently tank an elo. And in a way you could say that I'm a tanker. Whilst yes, I've not actually hit Legend this season, but I'm definitely of the skill level to hit Legend. I just choose to run very spicy teams, and as a result I typically play in a much lower elo range, well below my actual skill level. So I don't know, am I a tanker? Let me know in the comment section below. Now the next top is Legends gatekeeping you from hitting Legend or handing out free wins legends to get you over the line. Now this one I find really weird because it's like, you know, do you want legend players to just continue to win, or do you want them to tank? Which one is it? Last time we were just saying like we don't like legends tanking, but also we don't mind if they're giving us free elo in that sense. So I just find it weird, and I've got a hypothetical scenario which is maybe a little bit extreme, but I mean it's not too far off what could potentially happen. So let's say for example you've just barely hit legend, you get to 3001 elo, you barely get across the line, but you get there. You've got legend, you've got your pose, you do still need to do another set to get that Pikachu Libre, so just to guarantee it, to make it a little bit easier for you, you're going to use a premium pass, and that way you get it on your first battle. So let's say for example you then battle one legend in that set, you get that win, you get that Pikachu Libre, but in the next 4 battles you go up against trainers that are in the 2990 elo range. They are so close to legend, and you realize giving them that one free win could very well be the difference between them hitting legend that season or them actually losing elo and then just never hitting legend again. So you're generous, you decide, you know what, I'll give those 4 trainers a win, and as a result you end up losing like 30 to 40 elo in that set. And then the next set you're in the, I don't know, 2960, 2970 elo range, and then you face a lot of other trainers that are just so close to legend that you're like, okay fine, I'll give you guys free wins as well. And then you've just lost all 5 battles there, you're then down in the 2800s, and at this point you're battling against trainers that are also like, well this guy's a legend, surely he should just be giving me a free win, because you know if I get a 5-0 I could be very close to hitting legend in the next set. And as a result you just continually have to give out free wins until you've basically just tanked all the way down to 300 elo range, and then we just get the scenario that we had before where it's like, do you want people to tank or do you not? Do you, like, I just don't understand it. Sure, a legend might give you a free win, especially towards the end of the season where like their rank doesn't really matter. They literally might just go in, do a bunch of battles, and then quit at the end of each battle, just for those people that are pushing at the last minute to try and hit that legend rank or expert or whatever it is they're aiming for. But don't expect them to do that, because you know they're also just playing their game. I can guarantee you they are not gatekeeping you. They're just also trying to play in the Go Battle League after hitting legend. That's it. Like, they're not doing anything just to stop you from hitting whatever your goal is. They don't care about that whatsoever. Now the next topic that has been suggested is cheaters and hackers, and the person that suggested this topic didn't really go into any detail about it, so I don't really know what it is they want me to talk about specifically, but my opinion is if you're cheating in a way that gives you a significant competitive advantage over everyone else, say for example you're a spoofer, you can just teleport to any hundo or any perfect PvP IV Pokemon, so you're always going to have the best options available, then yeah, that's a bit unfair. If you use Deathit and you can get all the XLs by artificially walking with your Zygarde each day to pair it up for the Master League, then yeah, that's a bit unfair. But I really couldn't care less if you spoof to get a Shundo of every single costume Pikachu, because it makes no difference to me whatsoever. So yeah, if you get a huge competitive advantage from whatever cheating it is that you're doing, then yeah, you probably shouldn't do it, but if it doesn't harm anyone, I don't care. And then presumably as well, they want me to talk about the Discord bot thing that was exposed a while ago by PokeAK and then sort of relayed by a few other content creators that chipped in just to make more people aware of it. But this only affected a very small amount of people, just to be clear. But anyways, what people were doing was they were using a Discord bot to bring up the team and the moves of the opponents that they were facing as soon as they pair with them in GBL, and that gave them an absolutely huge advantage. Now, as soon as this was exposed, suddenly everyone in the comments was saying like, I've noticed this, no wonder I kept losing. People already knew my team and my moves before the battle even started. But again, this is just people trying to blame things other than themselves for losing, and the reality is you probably haven't even battled against someone using this Discord bot. I think it was like leaked that the server that was actually leaked only had like 50 members or something, and there were probably other Discord bots. I'm sure if one person can make it, other people can too, but there probably aren't that many people, or there probably weren't that many people using this bot anyway. So yeah, obviously it was a huge problem, but chances are you probably didn't even face anyone that was using it. Alright, so the final controversial issue that we'll talk about in today's video is the absolutely awful game state of the Go Battle League right now. And I'll be honest, I was very lenient at first. It came about, I think, around the same sort of time that we had the forced biome update. Now, I actually had the biome update long before a lot of people, because I live in the UK and some parts of the world just had it long before that, so I already had this change. But then when they forced it, that's when all these issues came about, and usually when there is a big change, certain bugs will come about. It's kind of inevitable, especially with Niantic, but as long as they are at least acknowledged and then patched within a reasonable time frame, I'll cut them some slack. But the awkward thing about this is, first of all, I think the Force update came just before a Go Battle weekend, so literally the worst possible timing for it, as, you know, who wants to do 200 battles when every single game is super laggy, super stuttery? It's just not very fun. And then the other thing is that Niantic haven't even listed it as an issue. Like, Niantic have their own known issues page for the Go Battle League, and stutter lag or frame drops or whatever it is that you want to call this issue isn't even listed as a bug that they're currently working on, and I think that is just unacceptable. And supposedly for some of the Play Pokemon tournaments, trainers had to download a local version of the game that ran with the old graphics just to ensure smooth gameplay. So obviously they are completely aware that this bug is a big issue, but they're just not communicating as usual. And I think a lot of GBL players would certainly opt to not have this biome update if it meant that GBL just ran smoothly until they sort out a fix. But let's face it, Niantic aren't going to give us that option, and unfortunately it is just not very fun at all. So yeah, I don't really know when they're going to address this, when they're going to fix it. It might be absolutely ages, but it looks like we're just going to have to live with it, which really sucks. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please make sure you leave a like, leave a comment letting me know, and as well, don't forget to respond to the question of the day if you haven't done so already. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. And if you want to take your support even further, you can now become a channel member with perks including early access to new videos, shoutouts at the end of each video, custom loyalty badges, and custom emojis to use in the comments. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that has already become a channel member. Your support is greatly appreciated, and with that being said, thank you all so much for watching today's video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.